Welcome back to Deviatus. I'd like to thank you again for joining me for another episode. This week, I did a major overhaul of my website that should make my content much easier to find with a new archive of episodes and show notes. So I'd like to encourage you to check it out at deviatus.com. And we've entered the time of year where weather warms up and everyone's planning their summer vacations. Families all over the world will soon be traveling to popular vacation spots, and many will seek the sun and the laid-back atmosphere of Southern California. Hotspots that attract tourists and locals alike include theme parks, beaches, and of course Hollywood. And while paranormal activity is frequently reported at some of these popular travel destinations, it's a commonly overlooked fact that the very hotels people stay in between their visits to these attractions are often rich with haunted history themselves. Today's guest is a professional photographer, historian, and author of the upcoming book, Haunted by History Volume 1. Craig Owens is about to release his book, which explores 8 of the most notoriously haunted hotels in Southern California. Stick around at the end of this week's episode to learn more about the exclusive offer available to listeners of Deviatus only. This will be a 2-part episode that dives deep into some of Craig's early paranormal experiences, including during his tenure working for Warner Brothers Studios, and some of the expected and unexplained events that occurred during the creation of his book while shooting on location at some of Southern California's most notorious hotels. Well, let's just start here. I read on your website that you were interested in the paranormal since around 1972. What kind of led you down this path?
Well, I grew up, part of my youth, my parents had moved to Columbus, Mississippi. My stepdad was an Air Force pilot, and so we were living on the base, and my mom loved collecting antiques, and she loved history. So one way or the other, we ended up at a southern plantation, big sprawling mansion, and built in 1852 called Waverly. Mm-hmm. And she became friends with the owner and ran an antique shop. And it was Robert and Donna Snow were their names. And they didn't have a lot of money, but in 1962, they had come across this really run-down mansion and property, and it was love at first sight, so they bought it from the family that had lived in that house from the 1850s to, I don't know, I'd be kind of guessing, but I'm thinking maybe 1920s, mm-hmm. Before they gave up on maintaining the mansion. So the Snows bought it in 1962, and they began to restore it, and they spent their whole lives restoring it, and it was beautiful. It was built had multiple floors, big spiral staircase. So when my mom became friends with them, she often brought me along with her. And the Snows just happened to have a child, their youngest child. They had several children, but their youngest was about maybe a year younger than me. Mm-hmm. So we were roughly around the same age. And he and I became, great kids, friends, at 6 years old, 7 years old. And so it seemed like it was, if it wasn't every weekend, it was every, other weekend, or maybe every 2-3 weekends, we would go there. And a lot of the times my mom took me there just to play with Gage, the boy over there. So one thing led to another. And as you can imagine, being, say, 7 years old and playing in this old antique furnished pre-Civil War mansion, was a pretty incredible experience. Had peacocks, along on the lawns, and it had chickens, and they had some barn type animals there. So all of that was very appealing. It also had a ghost, and I don't know how I heard about it, I think it might have been through Gage, the son, or maybe it was my parents whispering, about it, and I'm like, going, what's this? Explain it to me. I do remember though, at 7 years old, I was kind of like a little ghost hunter, So when I'd go to Waverly, I had heard that one of the corners of that mansion had as the story goes, while they were refinishing the parlor, one of the corners was ice cold during the summers, and there's no air conditioning there or ventilation. And according to the story, the parlor is where they laid the dead before burial. The Young family, who had built the mansion and had lived there several generations. So I would go there on a hot, sticky May, June afternoon, and I'd go every corner in the parlor, and I'd feel it, to see if it felt cold. And of course, when you're 7 years old, you have an imagination, so you're just certain that it may be a couple of degrees cooler than the rest of the house,
Right.
So I would always ask the Snows or tell the Snows, I think it might be a little cold, and they'd go, oh, I'm sure it is, But Waverly, the story behind Waverly Mansion, the ghost story that is that it's supposed to be haunted by a little girl ghost who was about 6 or 7 years old. And in the beginning, the activity was very subtle, but very pronounced. And it only happened to Mrs. Snow, who just happened to be taking care of the house during the days and evenings. And she would hear this little ghost girl cry out, "Mommy, Mommy." And so she would think it was Gage because she wasn't thinking it was a ghost. So she thought, oh, God, Gage may have hurt himself. So she'd go through the house going, Gage, is that you? No sound. Gage wasn't there. So it wasn't Gage. So she would dismiss it, thought it was her imagination, then it happened again. And she'd go through the same routine again. No Gage, but there was definitely a little small child crying. And then she started finding indentations in the bed on the second floor, right by the stairs that went down to the first floor. And she would straighten the bed because no one slept there, and she was wondering, why is this bed kind of messed up? And sure enough, the indentation would be found, a couple of days later, as well as the child crying out, "Mommy." So Mrs. Snow started telling Mr. Snow, her husband, that I think we've got a ghost. And Mr. Snow didn't believe in ghosts. And he just didn't believe her. Thought, well, I think it's your imagination. It's an old house. There's a lot of history here, Mrs. Snow was not one of those people to make things up, though. And so she was quite insistent that there was something there. So she, as the story goes, she finally convinced her husband to stay with her and just sit in that bedroom and just wait for something to happen. So he finally did, and he became a believer. He literally witnessed the indentation form by itself on that bed.
Now, I don't mean to interrupt you, but was this when you were friends with Gage?
This was when I was friends with Gage. Now, this story happened a little bit before then.
Okay.
I don't know exactly when it happened, but it probably happened in the late 60s, 1960s.
Okay.
Maybe early 1970s. Now, when I was there, it was like 1971, 72. So it wasn't that long ago before I had heard the story.
Mm-hmm.
And but the skirt around the bed also swished for no reason after the indentation went away. So it was as if the ghost child just woke up and jumped down off the bed and kicked the skirt.
Hmm.
Well, Robert Snow became a believer, but they did not want to tell the story to the public. So they kept it to themselves. But they did tell their tight circle of friends and their family. And that's where we found out about it. Okay. Um, Interestingly enough, they never saw the ghost while I was there. And I never saw the ghost. I have no memory of ever encountering the ghost. And I'd spent a couple of nights there as a kid. But around 1991, I went back to visit Waverly, and I was an adult now, and I hadn't seen them since 1974 when we moved away from Mississippi. And I got to talking about that ghost story again with Mrs. Snow, and by this time she had actually seen the ghost.
Mm.
And she saw the ghost right on the stairs outside of that bedroom. And then, believe it or not, one of Mrs. Snow's daughters also saw the ghost roughly in the same location, just outside that bedroom, always on the stairs. And they never could figure out who that ghost girl was. At first they thought it might have had something to do with a slave, or the spirit was a slave ghost. But then when they actually saw it, it was Caucasian. So they did their own research, and they could not determine who it was because all the builder, George Hamilton Young, I think was his name. All of his children that lived in the mansion, none of them died at 3 or 4 years old, and so now the Snows at one time, they were even thinking, well, maybe it was a grandchild or something. And that's the strange thing about history and trying to link the history to paranormal, is that both of them have a lot in common in that even with history, there are a lot of pieces missing, and it's very hard to find those pieces to put in place to explain what exactly is going on. So I always say, history and mystery rhyme, but they're very similar. They have that sense of mystery too. History has mystery. Let's just put it that way.
Okay. So let me ask you this. I don't want to jump too far ahead, but I know you have skills in historical research as well as the photography, obviously that's coming out in your book. But that would seem to be characteristics that would give you a lot of strength in a paranormal investigation type of team. Do you have any experience doing that?
With the team?
Yes.
No. I even though I'm a believer in the paranormal, I've always been hesitant about joining a team. I like helping teams, but joining teams are a little different because sometimes I don't feel like I want to get locked into the politics that go with being in a team.
Right.
And just kind of keep the politics out of things, out of my life, but I love doing the research. I actually think that, in my opinion, that the historical research is probably the most important step to any paranormal research, and it's probably the one thing that most paranormal groups don't do, and they should be doing it. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's one thing to just get on the internet and just grab a bunch of information and say, okay, I've got it. I know the history. It's another thing to go into the library and try to see what kind of fell through the cracks, second guess what someone else has already posted on the internet as far as history goes. There's a lot of inaccuracies online. And I found that out myself because, back when I started exploring haunted places, I'd pull information off the internet thinking it was true. It turns out it wasn't, or there was something off. about the history, or there's much more to the story than what was briefly summarized in a sentence or two. So, I love to, in answering your question, I love to work with paranormal groups if they show an interest in the historical end, rather than just going in and seeing what their little gadgets can find, and getting a thrill, going there for the excitement, going because you're ghost hunting. I like to work with groups that actually have a genuine curiosity and wondering if there is a definite connection between a past event or a past person connected to that property and the property itself.
Okay.
It's like, is a haunting at a specific property, is it a piece of history that has been left behind that is trying to communicate something to us?
Well, have you had since then? Have you had any other personal experiences that you couldn't complain prior to the creation? Or I'm sorry, that you couldn't explain prior to the creation of your book?
Oh yeah, not a whole lot. I actually grew up to be kind of, in my opinion, fairly ghost-free. Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't find anything at Waverly, not to say that something didn't happen. I just didn't notice, Boy, I sure would have loved to have seen that little ghost girl. But it didn't happen with me. But again, I think I might have been even skeptical throughout the whole thing. When I was 20 years old, I had something odd happen to me, and I didn't even recognize it as being paranormal.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I was just going through a tough time in my life, and I'm imagining these things. It had to be me. It couldn't be paranormal. It had to be me.
Mm-hmm.
I had moved into an efficiency in like a mid-century modern Japanese-inspired apartment complex in a medium-sized West Texas city called Odessa, Texas. And the apartment complex was the Kona Kai. And I had this weird little efficiency that was surrounded by like a little man-made lake. And I had like a winding spiral staircase that went only to my door. And the walls were about a foot high. And then the rest was just all slanted. It was like a cone. I lived in a cone. And it was already had furniture. I don't know what the history of the place was. I mean, I asked, and I was told that it used to be a rec room before they rented as a single unit, and so there was like supposedly a pool table there, and people that lived in the Kona Kai could hang out. But it didn't take long before weird things happened there, and as soon as I moved in, this was around 1985. I was working as a videotape editor for a local television station, and I had just enrolled into the junior college in Odessa so that I could make good grades and just jump out into a larger, accredited university. So I had a lot going on in my life. So I moved in there, and I was kind of, artsy. So I had this 5 foot tall dummy, 4 foot, 5 foot tall dummy of Ronald Reagan that I put together out of old clothes, wires, and a rubber mask. Those little rubber masks of Reagan's features that were popular back then.
Right.
And so, I was going to turn my place into like the monkey's pad, So I had all these kind of like bizarre little places around, but I had this dummy sitting by itself in like part of the efficiency, and I had a broken ceramic mouse about so big, 2-3 inches, and I had it stuffed in the suit pocket of this dummy. Mm-hmm. Well, I would work the midnight shift, and I'd come back from work about 8 in the morning, and so I'd go straight to bed. But I'd come in and I'd find that little ceramic mouse on the floor, like consistently on the floor, but it was not just at the feet of the the dummy, it was always like 4 feet away, 3 feet away. So because I was gone working all night, I would just kind of just put the mouse back in the pocket and then, go to sleep and not think about it. Then the next morning I'd come in from work, the mouse is on the floor again, put it back in the pocket. Then this happened like 3-4 days in a row. Well, that finally started getting my attention because I'm like, going, what is going on? I even stuck the mouse deep into the pocket so the ears barely popped out. Next morning on the floor. So this was this was slightly, in that era when people really didn't have video cameras and cell phones where they could monitor what was going on. So I decided that on my day off, I would see for myself what is causing that mouse to fall. And so I ran all kinds of different experiments by trying to whack it with a yardstick out of the pocket. Mm-hmm. And it took quite a bit of inertia to make the mouse fall. And when it fell just right at the feet. It didn't bounce. It didn't go 3-4 feet. It was just a flat fall because it was carpeted. And I think after several occasions, if I really manipulated that mouse, I mean, like you knock it and you just spin it as fast as you can, I could get it to go about 3-4 feet. But if it just dropped, it fell just right at the feet of this dummy. So I never could figure that out. And sure enough, about the time I started running experiments, that mouse stopped falling and it never fell again from that pocket, okay? So this was like every day for about a week or 10 days, and then suddenly that whole phenomenon just stopped. So, I forgot about it. Life went on. Then I felt a tapping on my shoulder one evening, and I turned around just expecting, it's one of those instinctive things. I knew I was alone in my apartment, and I had the TV on. I was like making dinner. But, you're kind of caught up in things. So, something taps you on the shoulder, you just instinctively turn around because it was so real. And that's what happened to me. I instinctively turned around. No one was there. Okay. I'm tired. That's what I'm thinking to myself. Okay, I'm hallucinating this. I'll just keep going. So forgot about that too. And then there was another incident where I was trying to make my bed on like a Sunday morning. And then suddenly this big burst of hot air hits the back of my neck. And I actually literally can hear it go, That kind of freaked me out, because I looked everywhere. Where could that sound? And how is it possible for a burst of hot air to hit the back of my neck? And again, my only conclusion was, I'm tired. I've got an overactive imagination. It's me. So I'll just keep quiet about it, and just move on. I'm obviously stressed, And then there was one other incident that happened. I only lived there a year, so all of this happened in a year. The mouse falling, the tapping on the shoulder, the burst of hot air. The one that scared me probably the most was I was getting ready to go to school, and it was about 8:30, and I was rushing to put my shoes on, and I had my clock radio playing. And then suddenly that station changed. And it only moved like maybe a quarter of the turn. But it was enough, and it was slow enough where you hear that static in between stations. Mm-hmm. And I was always very anal about, getting the right frequency in place. I hated not having it correctly dialed. And it went to another station. And boy, I put on my shoes really quick, grabbed my stuff, and at the doorway, I just kind of yelled back, "If you're a ghost haunting this place, please do the dishes by the time I come home." And then I ran out the door, and I stayed out till about 10, okay? I went and visited my family, my grandparents, and, it's about 9:30, 10, and they're going, "Well, Craig, it's getting late. We got to go to bed. Don't you think you ought to go home?" And I'm going, "Well, let me just finish watching this show, and I'll go." I was nervous about going back to the place at that point, because that kind of got to me. I did eventually go back, and unfortunately my dishes were not done.
Oh no.
They were still dirty and in the sink, but no more paranormal activity happened. Flash forward, I finally move out. I moved to another place. I did have friends that were, oh, you'll love this, but my neighbors that lived right below me, they worked as grave diggers at Odessa's major cemetery, okay? I don't know if that's a clue or what of what was going on, but they had invited me over to have a few beers. And so I went over, and I hadn't seen them in a while. And they introduced me to the guy that moved into that same efficiency after I moved out. And that guy couldn't wait to talk to me. And he pulled me aside and he said, "Look, can I ask you a question?" I said, "Sure." And he said, "You used to live there right before I did, I understand." And I said, "Yes." And said, "Is that place haunted?" And my first reaction was no, no. And he said, "Well, let me tell you something. I was standing at the sink, and I was doing something at the counter, and something tapped me on the shoulder. And I turned around, and there was nobody there. My girlfriend was across the room." And I went, "That's when the light bulb goes off?" And he goes, "Really?" Because that happened to me. And then he said, and there was this other incident that happened. I was standing over the bed making it, and I felt this big burst of hot air hit the back of my neck, and I could hear it go, And I'm just in amazement. I'm just staring at this guy go, "Well, that happened to me too." And then he goes, "Well, what else happened to you?" And so I told him the other incidences, and then I just said, "Well, look, these things were isolated incidents. I lived there a year. It didn't scare me that much, with the exception of the radio dial turning." And I said, I wouldn't let it bug you or anything, but thank you for sharing your stories, because all this time I thought it was me, and now that I see that you're experiencing this thing, now I'm realizing it wasn't me. It wasn't my imagination. You're validating a lot of things that happened to me. Well, he got scared and he said, "Look, if anything else happens, I'm moving out because I don't like this." I said, "Well, okay, well, I'll keep me posted with what's going on. I'd love to hear, more." Well, I didn't hear from him in about a month and a half or so. So I go to visit, and I go, "Well, what happened to the guy that, I was talking to my former ex-neighbors, and I said, "Well, what happened to the guy, that moved in right above you?" And they said, "Oh, he moved out." He gave us 30 minutes. He gave us 30-day notice, and he left his lease. He moved out. And I was like going, wow, wow, So I don't know who moved in later. I've always been curious about that place, always. So, in I guess around 2009, 2010, I actually contacted the Konakai because, during the great, Odessa's an oil boom town. So during oil recessions, that place dies out, and then it comes back to life, and then it dies out. So the Konakai, that apartment building, was definitely had its ups and downs economically, and I do remember in the 90s that it was closed down, period. Then I found out that it had reopened. So I contacted the management and I asked about that efficiency, and apparently from what they told me is that efficiency stopped being rented not too long after that guy moved out, claiming that it was haunted by a ghost. And to this day, they said that it was storage. They just turned it into a storage room, and then that's it. So I haven't followed up. I don't go to Odessa anymore. So I don't know whatever happened to that efficiency. But that was my first time living in a haunted place. So it opened my eyes quite a bit. But then the next thing didn't happen to me until like 1999 at Warner Brothers. The studio itself. You want to hear that story?
Absolutely, yeah. And that was one of the questions I had for you. I know you had a lot of experience in Hollywood, but yeah, go ahead and segue into that one.
Yeah, the interesting thing about that is that, first of all, I moved to Los Angeles from Texas in 1994, and I was like a fish to water out here. This felt like home, where Texas never did. And I loved Hollywood. When you grew up watching movies, even the classics, the black and white classics, there's always, and you visit Los Angeles for the first time, there's always that sense of familiarity that you have when you go through there, because you've seen a lot of these places in movies and TV all your life.
Right.
You just never knew exactly where they were, geographically pinpointed. But, you're always having this sense of wonder and adventure of I've been here before, as you go and explore the city. And that's exactly what I used to do when I wasn't working. I came to Los Angeles to work in the film and television department because I'd gotten my college degree in communications from Southern Methodist University in Dallas, and we studied film and film history. So when I came to LA in 1994, it was a little tough getting the door open to the production industry, so I had a lot of time to explore Los Angeles. And I just loved it. I loved old Hollywood, loved everything about it. So you can imagine how it felt when I finally got hired to work at Warner Brothers studio in Burbank, California. It was like heaven, So I took any kind of job they would give me back in the old days of trying to break in the business, and I often got hired to be what was called a script production assistant, which worked under the writers. And the script production assistant was a production assistant that sat around and waited until the script was ready. And once the script was ready for like a television show, they hand it to you, and you make about 300 to 500 copies of it on a Xerox machine late at night, and you deliver it to various offices around the lot, and then you take the rest of them and you drive all over Los Angeles County, dropping them off to actors, producers, directors, whatnot. Sometimes they're awake and they'll take it. More often than not, they're not awake, so you have to leave it in a special place. And it was a very, kind of isolated job, a very important job. And it's a job where you really aren't micromanaged at all. I mean, obviously, if you don't deliver the scripts, you'll hear about it and your boss will hear about it. But otherwise, the show puts its entire trust on you that you're going to get it done, and you're going to get it done in a timely fashion. Well, oddly enough, on Halloween night in 1999, I was called in early to make scripts because it was Halloween and everyone wanted to go trick-or-treating or go to parties. So they ended their rehearsal for a show. I think the show was Odd Man Out. It was like a show that didn't last a season, but it was work. So they called me in around maybe 3 p.m. And Warner Brothers was pretty much empty by that time. I mean, there were a few people around, but the studio certainly closed early so that people could get ready for Halloween. So I was happy to get in there and make those scripts early because I didn't like getting caught up in the parades and whatnot, driving all around, dropping off scripts, avoiding traffic snarls and people crossing the street. So I was happy to be there. So the sun was just beginning to set, finished the scripts. I I started dropping them around the lot, and one of my big drops was at a sound stage where the set was built. So as the sun was going down, I drove my little golf cart, my studio golf cart, to this the sound stage, and it's one of the oldest sound stages, one of the original ones built at Warner Brothers. I believe, I'm thinking it was, according to the plaque, I think it was built around 1929. So it saw a lot of films and television through the years, and many classics were partially filmed there. It also happened to be exactly across the street from Clint Eastwood's bungalow. Okay, so it's in. I always called it the Beverly Hills of Warner Brothers.
Yeah.
You know, it's the nice section. It's where Jack Warner's offices used to be, just walking distance. And so I was at this sound stage, and I must have had about 50 scripts in my hands to drop off, and it's the same delivery, it's the same routine every night after night. So I was just going through, the process, and there's these little rickety wood stairs that, go up to some real tiny cubicles. So I'd leave 5 scripts there, 5 there, and then I'd go and drop the remaining on the stage. Well, the stage is dark, when I come in, so I flip on the lights, and usually it's these overhead floodlights that flicker, 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 and then maybe 30 seconds later they come on, and it's real low lighting, but then as it warms up, it gets brighter.
Right.
And so that's what I was doing. I flipped on those lights. I go up to the stairs, and just as I was dropping them off, I started becoming aware that I was hearing a woman's voice from somewhere down below. And it was very faint, and I couldn't figure out what it was. And so I stopped at the railing and just started listening, because I thought, well, at first someone had left a radio on or a TV on or even a walkie-talkie. But I thought it was odd that I can't make out any words. It's just this. And it kept moving around, the sound. So I never could pinpoint exactly where it was. So I thought at that moment that I would just wait, because, I had worked at a television station before, and I know that, there are FCC laws that require a station identification every certain amount of minutes. And so I figured, well, if this is a radio or TV or something, it's going to cut to a station ID. Well, it didn't, and there was a lot of dead space in between hearing this voice. Seconds, when I define dead space, it's a couple of seconds of silence.
Right.
So I kept listening. I just knew that if I went down those stairs, that voice would disappear and I wouldn't find it. So as long as I was standing up there, I might have a chance of hearing, what's going on. So I thought I'm going to sit this one out and see what happens. So I looked at my little pager, because this was in the era of pagers, and yeah. I looked and I clocked, and I said, okay, I'm going to give myself 20 minutes to figure out where the sound is coming. Then I absolutely have to go downstairs to that set and drop off the scripts. So I stood there, and it was the most fascinating 20 minutes of my life, one of them, because I was spellbound. I mean, I was hearing this voice talking, and it really sounded like someone reciting something, a woman. And another thing that made it really creepy is that those lights overhead that I just described, that, flicker and then turn on slowly, and they never worked correctly that night. They only half of the stage the lights would turn on. The rest were just either didn't turn on at all, or they were just flickering madly the entire time. So it had kind of this haunted house Halloween effect going on. So you're hearing this, and these lights are just flashing. And I'm standing there at the railing looking down at all of this going, this is so weird. It's like, is someone playing a joke on me? I mean, is this like a Halloween prank? And I'm like thinking, who would do this? And I can't think of anyone that would have done it, because Who would go out of their way to do something like that to a punky little script production assistant, So after 20 minutes had passed, I decided, well, I'm going to sneak down those stairs real as soft as I can and see if I can sneak up on the voice. So I did. I mean, I was trying to be but they're wooden stairs, so they creaked. And as I predicted, as soon as I got to the bottom of the stairs, that voice stopped, okay, and it was silent. So then I went around and I said, well, even though I know it's probably not a TV and probably not a radio by now, I still feel like I got to walk around and see where it might be. I'll look for speakers. I'll look for a walkie-talkie, anything that could be on. There was nothing that I could find, even remotely close to looking like something that could have produced that sound. Meanwhile, the lights are literally spooking me at this point because they're flashing so erratically, and I just felt kind of scared out on the set. It literally felt like something didn't want me to be there. The air was very thick, with like some kind of tension, and I just got the instinct to get out. So I set the scripts on the table right in the middle of the set, and I started walking towards the door. And unfortunately, I had to walk quite a distance to get to the door to get into the stage. So I'm walking, not running, I promise. And so I'm walking towards the stairs, and then suddenly, I'm walking towards the front door, and then suddenly, honest to God, I'm hearing the clicking of heels from behind me. Someone is like following, and I'm literally hearing what sounds like the swishing of fabric, like taffeta, or I forgot the name of the fabric, but it was like the swishing of like a dress or a gown,
Right.
And the clop, clop, clop of heels. And so I'm trying to mentally gauge how far back I'm trying to guess those steps are. Mm-hmm. And so I go out into an open area where there's no place where anyone can hide. An open area between the set and the door that I'm trying to exit. And I deduced that, it had to have been about 30, 40 feet behind me, maybe less. So I stopped and I immediately turned around. No one's there. But what I thought was weird was that the steps, the clacking of the heels, they stopped about a quarter to a half second after I stopped. So it wasn't exactly in sync with my movements.
Right.
And I thought, that's weird. So I turn around and I start walking back to the door. I go about 2-3 steps towards the door, and I start hearing the clacking of shoes again and the swishing of this fabric, okay? And as I'm walking, it sounds like it's even closer now. So, and then again, when it sounds like it's about 10 feet behind me, I turn around. In the same process, it's like the clacking of the heels stopped about a quarter to a half second after I stopped and turned around. And it's almost like it didn't stop until after it saw that I had stopped, Yeah. And there was absolutely nothing that anybody could have hid behind. So that second time, that did it. I think I ran to the door at that point. I was very close anyway. And again, I have this tendency, just like with the Konakai, I have this tendency to smart off, okay? So I get to the door, and as I'm flipping off those lights that are still flickering, and, I go, "Happy Halloween, hope to see you soon," or something like that. And I said, "I'm leaving, you can come out now." And I flipped on the lights, and I went out the door. Well, I went to that golf cart, and I'm shaking. I'm like, so I'm still not 100% sure that was a ghost. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
I'm still kind of second guessing myself because this defied one of my core beliefs. Like I usually when people start a story with one Halloween night, my BS alarm goes off, right? It's like nothing happens on Halloween. What's so special about that night? It's no different than any other night, well, so something happens to me on Halloween night, okay? So I'm sitting at the cart, and I must have waited for like 15, 20 minutes, but I moved the cart where I could watch both doors, and so I can see someone coming out. No one ever came out. And I absolutely had to get back to work. I had a lot of stuff to deliver that night. So the next day, I tried to talk to my supervisor about it. And I asked him, I said, well, this happened to me, this happened to me last night. And he didn't believe me. And he was like one of my good friends. I mean, we worked on several shows together. And I said, well, just keep an ear out, for anyone boasting that how they really pulled one over on the script PA.
Yeah.
No one ever came forward. No one ever believed my story. I even asked security, Warner Brothers security, because every now and then I'd bump into them making their rounds late at night. And I'd say, look, has anyone ever had any weird stories, happening about these sound stages? Are there any stories of ghosts here? And depends on who you met. A lot of them said no. I don't believe in ghosts, or no, nothing's ever happened. But something, years later, I started meeting people that were coming up to me, and they were saying, there are stories around Warner Brothers.
Yeah.
House cleaning staff that would come in late at night, usually working the same kind of shifts that I worked. They'd go into Jack Warner's office building, and then they'd just quit on the spot.
Wow.
And then they'd have to bring in replacement crews. And then I think the art directing building, where the art directors are, the department is. It's an old building as well, and I've been in there a few times dropping off scripts, and I'll admit, it's kind of got a weird vibe to it, but apparently people have experienced things there late at night.
Wow.
And then I've even heard stories about the sound stages that people have had probably similar things. And the interesting thing, I don't know if you're even aware of this, but the interesting thing about Warner Brothers is that it literally is kind of across the street and a little ways away from Forest Lawn Hollywood Park.
Right.
People buried there. A lot of stars are buried there. In fact, I think that's why Betty Davis chose that spot to be buried alongside with her mom, is that she's kind of on a hill that, is probably her best vantage point to look over Warner Brothers if she wanted to. But I'm not trying to say that Betty Davis, haunts Warner Brothers, but my feeling was that night, the night I was there, it was definitely being haunted by some former actor or actress.
Yeah. Let's see here. I did have one more question about an experience that I read about on your website before we kind of dive into your book. It said something about your photo shoot at the Palomar in Old Town Temecula.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And you actually had an appearance on a show called My Ghost Story.
That's true.
Tell us about that photo shoot.
Oh, well, that was actually part of the book. I think I before introducing how the book kind of came about, and then getting right to the Palomar shoot, is that after the incident at the Halloween incident at Warner Brothers, by that time I was frustrated because I couldn't get people to believe the story, really. People are going, yeah, yeah, yeah. It didn't happen to me, so, and, the kind of the blank stares, even from my advisor, my supervisor and friend, the blank stare, like, maybe you've been working too many late nights,
I know how you feel.
And so, it was like, I need to carry something around so I can capture this stuff. Because it doesn't happen very often to me, and I'm not one of those people that hallucinates, and certainly not one of those people that makes things up. But every blue moon, something weird happens, and it may be years in between. So I wanted to. I was started thinking about what can I have on me to document this sort of stuff as it happens, and then that's what I started doing. Buying recorders, buying this and that, and then when I started doing these photo shoots at allegedly haunted hotels, I would bring this equipment. And so it turned out to be kind of like a ghost hunting excursion, sort of. But if I'm going to be in these haunted places, I am going to see if I can document, what I think I might hear or may not hear, or maybe there's something going on that I'm not hearing or not particularly paying attention. So that's kind of how that developed. Now, the Palomar was early on in. Once I made a decision to start doing some photo shoots, some vintage style photo shoots in allegedly haunted places, the Palomar was kind of interesting because what ended up happening is I'd read, the stories online about it being haunted. I was skeptical. Okay. Mm-hmm. So I didn't quite believe the story. So I kind of needed to, see it for myself. So before I would go and spend any kind of money, doing a photo shoot there.
Right.
So I actually scouted the place earlier in, I think it was 2011, okay? And I ended up having the place all to myself. I rented the place all to myself. There was only one other person staying at the hotel. I couldn't kick them out, obviously, but I rented every other room to keep anyone else from moving in.
Oh, wow.
And so I rented the whole, it was a small hotel. I mean, it was like 8 rooms, I think I rented the whole thing for like $200, okay. $250. I can't remember, but I rented the place and I brought my audio recorders and it definitely had kind of a spooky vibe at night, especially when it's like a real quiet building. Sure enough, when I left, I never got like responses to like questions that I would ask. I never have at that place. It's really weird. I've never gotten an EVP during an EVP session there. Okay. And let me just preface: EVP means electronic voice phenomena, which does exist. The argument is, are they ghosts or not? But they do exist. So I would leave these recorders on all night and just monitor as I slept. And sure enough, footsteps clomping up the stairs, clomping around, big bangs that I slept through. And even voices. So I became convinced there's something going on there. So it's worthy of doing a photo shoot. So I rented the building again. This time there was no other person staying. Okay, so I had it all to myself and my crew. Because I had probably more crew than I had rooms, I really didn't want my cast to stay in every room and we all hung out together because it would probably prevent me from like running more paranormal experiments. I wanted greater control of the environment. So I gave people an option. I didn't want to disappoint them by saying, okay, we're shooting here, but you're not sleeping here. Only I am, you know. So I gave them the option. If you wanted to stay in the hotel, you know, the haunted hotel, you can, but you have to, you know, you have to participate in the paranormal investigations, and you have to follow certain rules, okay, in doing that, which means that you've got to, you know, you have to be quiet and you can't be partying and disrupting, you know, while we're trying to mic this place for the night. Mm-hmm. And if you don't want to stay in the haunted hotel, I'm going to put you in a room, you know, literally half a mile away in a Best Western. And so it worked out really nicely. Only a few people stayed at the Palomar. Everyone else stayed, you know, at the Best Western. Okay. So no one really understands the history of the Palomar Inn, other than it was just I was going by the history on the historic plaque. I turned out later it's mostly wrong or very, it's sketchy. You know, some things are right, but not quite as right as they could be, you know, kind of thing. And it's just because a lot of those records were just destroyed or disappeared through the years. And Temecula was an old west town that became like a pit stop for motorists for, you know, many decades before it actually grew into a city. So this hotel came about in probably the late 1920s. It was originally called the Mcculloch Hotel, but no one has any pictures of the Mcculloch Hotel. None exist. No one. I have not, even after all these years of searching, I've yet to see any picture that says Mcculloch Hotel on that building, or pictures taken even in the 1930s or late 1920s. So much of this building is you know, very much steeped in mystery and speculation as to its history. Because I couldn't really do a shoot focused on the history themes, I decided to choose a theme that I thought suited the architecture and atmosphere of the hotel. So I picked an early 1930s B movie Western, you know, the kind that where the bad guys have machine guns and ride cars and the good guys rode horses and had six shooters. You know, they went to the corral, old barn dance on Friday nights, you know. And so I did it along those themes. So I wanted it to have kind of a modern, when I define modern Western theme, I'm defining it as modern 1930s Western theme. And so I cast people to be the gangster on the lam from the law, and he's holed up in this crappy little hotel in the middle of Podunk, and it happened to be a brothel as well. So, you know, I played up kind of the prostitute theme. That actually is one of the legends behind the Palomars, that it might have been a place where cowboys met, you know, women of the night. So I did that, and then I wanted the hero to be really nerdy, you know, like Gene Autry. Well, Gene Autry's not really nerdy, but I wanted him to be kind of a goofy variation of Gene Autry or Roy Rogers or some of the early film cowboy stars, right?
Right.
So I came up with this kind of like storyline, and so I just started shooting it. And all around this building, and it's a small building. It's I think it occupies maybe a quarter of an acre. I mean, it's just a 10-room, 2-level building, and so we were shooting. We were having a lot of fun for the most part. I mean, it was a blast. We all got, you know, I didn't dress in costume, but everyone else did, and it was a lot of fun because we had the place to ourselves. On one afternoon, though, something happened. And what ended up happening was very strange. I still can't figure it out. As much as I want to dismiss my own photo as non-paranormal, I can't. And it really, I still have a hard time accepting some things from it, because I thought I was a know-it-all. I thought I knew so much about the paranormal, and boy, it turned out that I had to rethink some things. Okay, so what ended up happening is one afternoon, all I was doing was getting one shot off before we all broke for dinner. So everyone was kind of waiting on me to get the shot, and I only was shooting one model, and he had a Tommy gun in his hands. It was not a real Tommy gun. It was like a replica with the orange tip. And so he's standing on the stairs, pointing this replica Tommy gun up the stairs. And it was still daylight outside, so I wanted to kind of create an illusion of night, in that he was climbing up the stairs from a possible cellar speakeasy. So all I did was I was using virtually natural lighting to shoot this, but one of the table lamps close to, in a corner area, all I did was take off the lampshade so that through a harsher light and through shadows against the model, so that it looked like he's, kind of in a deep, dark place. And then I just kind of fooled with the aperture to kind of bring out the drama of the shadows a little bit. And then the rest I would do in post, which would be to darken everything and make it look even more like nighttime. Okay. So I was just firing off these shots. I mean, it was a very laid back atmosphere. No one was walking in and out of my shots. The person on the stage had, I was trying to keep him focused, because any motion, anybody walking close to him, he broke character. It was like, am I doing something wrong? So, I'm like, let's give him his space so that he can focus on and we could get the shot. So there were people all around, but they just weren't in the shot. Well, I'm like shooting some photos, making a little adjustments. The bulb was throwing a glare on one of the glass framed photos by the staircase. So I removed it, and I removed some other things, and was just kind of tinkering before going back and shooting. So then I finally got to the point where I was shooting a few shots. And then everyone's like going, when are we going to eat? When are we going to eat? So I go, okay, I'm done. So I take my camera off the tripod, and I go to the model still on the stairs, and I said, let's take a look at what we shot. I often do that. So as I went through the pictures on the LED screen, one of the images had a big black shadow light through it, and the model was the first one to notice it. And I remember very clearly, he said, "What the hell is that?" Mm-hmm. And I looked at it, and I go, "Uh-oh." I thought, that's weird. I don't know what that is. It looks to me like I'm looking at the picture in the black and white image, okay, on my LED screen. So it looked like a shadow. Mm-hmm. And it looked like, I thought, could I have caught a shadow figure? So I immediately said, okay, hold on, guys. I'm going to look at this on my notebook. So I ran up to my Mac, which was in my room upstairs, and I plugged in the camera, and I quickly, not so quickly, but I quickly, as quick as I knew how, uploaded the photos onto the notebook so I could look at it. And sure enough, that was a figure that was semi-solid, semi-transparent, and he's leaning over, looking like he's picking up something off the table. And so I took the notebook downstairs and said, "You guys have got to see this. What do you think?" And everyone stood around, and they're like going, "Huh?" Fortunately for me, when I shoot, even though I'm lighting it and shooting it in black and white, I'm shooting it where I have a raw image as well, which is color.
Right.
So I have two versions of the same photo. And so we were looking at the black and white, and we look at the color version. And the color version, this mysterious person has pigmentation, like a normal human being does. And but it was very dark looking, like he's wearing a black suit or something. Then the next thing is, what is he reaching over and picking up? Well, we look at the table, and there was nothing on the table, but there used to be something on the table, and it was a couple of stacks of brochures for Temecula's wine tasting going on, things to do in Temecula. So there were a couple of stacks there. Now, interestingly enough, those stacks were on that table while I was shooting, and one of the models, his name was Adam, he was sitting behind me in a back corner, and at one point he had asked me, do you want me to go and move those stacks out of your shot? And I was like, not even thinking about moving them. To me, it was, you couldn't tell what they were. They weren't bothering anything. So I just said, no, leave them there. Nobody knows what it is. And I said, look, if I decide not to like them, I want to remove them later. They're easily, I can Photoshop those out, or I can move them out if they bug me. But no, I'm more interested in moving the stools out of the way, moving the glass photo, that's causing the glare. Didn't want to worry about that. Well, that's what that mystery man was reaching for in the photo. He was reaching for those brochures. So the next question is, I specifically said leave the brochures on the table, not to worry about them. Now the brochures are gone. Where are they? So several cast members found them, and because I didn't know where they were. They found them in a strange corner of that room, and it was, according to them, there was a couple of sheets of paper that were just covering them.
Oh, wow.
So it was like someone had it's not only had someone moved them, but someone had placed something on top of it.
Well, let me ask you this, because
kind of hidden.
Yeah. I think, whenever I look at photos that paranormal investigators take, they usually take, 3 or 4 in a row of the same thing. Where in your series of photos, I guess chronologically, was this particular photo?
Oh, let me think. It was kind of right smack dab in the middle, closer to the middle. I mean, I looked at all those details, because I'm asked that from time to time. Mm-hmm. And I was even looking at the immediate sequence. And there was I was shooting a new photo maybe every 10 seconds, 12 seconds. I wasn't doing click, 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 click. There's no reason to do that. And that's kind of, a lot of people that they have their perception of photographers, they think that all photographers are like, the photographer in that 1960s film Blow Up, where he's going click, 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 click. And it's exciting for television for photographers to do that when shooting them for films and TV, but you don't need to do it because my model was very stationary. And I was just making adjustments, f-stop, half up, stop up, half up, stop down, refocusing, making sure I got everything. So there was no need to do rapid fire photos on someone who's standing still. Mm-hmm. So about every 10 seconds, and it was right kind of in the middle of the photo shoot because I continued to shoot afterwards, and and obviously I was shooting before. So, it was somewhere in the middle. What's interesting, there were many things that really bothered me about the photo. One thing, I should say that the camera was set to, the exposure was set for half a second. Okay, so there is, when you shoot motion in half a second, it will be blurred. But half a second is still pretty pretty fast, right? So I was shooting in half a second, and the things that bugged me about it, and why I didn't really want to share it online, post it, and try to promote this as, the next great ghost photo or whatever, and try to call all attention to myself, was that I was afraid that I had missed something in my logic that could explain it as not being paranormal. Another thing that was deeply embarrassing is that I know that people that would look at the photo would go, "Oh, it's obviously not a ghost. It's casting a shadow." And that's what I used to say when people would show me their ghost photos. It's like, "Oh, that can't be paranormal. It's casting a shadow. See?"
Right.
Ghosts don't cast shadows. Don't you know that? That's like ghost hunting 101, right? Well, I have a shadow in mine, and I didn't believe that was possible if it's a real ghost.
Well, let me stop right there. I know you're in the middle of kind of evaluating this picture, but I have seen both. I've actually seen photos presented that there's no shadow, and I kind of tend to personally believe if there is a shadow, I mean, obviously something's obstructing the light or something's reflecting light for it to show up on the lens. So why would it be so difficult to believe it might block light and cast a shadow?
That is what I had to rethink my values and my beliefs. And, my belief ultimately is that basically it's the law of science. If something is solid enough in mass, it should produce a shadow. So therefore, an apparition, guess what? If that's true, then an apparition, whether full body or not, if it's solid enough, scientifically proven, it should cast a shadow. And that's what I had to accept, is that it's not like a hologram or an illusion of someone being solid. It actually is someone solid, or something solid, I should say. So yeah, ghosts have I've come to the conclusion that yes, it seemed, based on my photo, it appears that ghosts can literally manifest in a solid form. And when it manifests in a solid form, it is capable of casting a shadow. It's probably capable of actually being touched, right, and actually feeling a tactile sensation. So yeah, that was a real tough one, because I thought, like I said, I thought I knew much more than I thought I did. And so I had to rethink things and eat crow a little bit. And there's still a lot of people that, they feel the same way as me, I think, about that. But, I took that photo and I showed it to a lot of people. And I've shown it to photographers that have been around for 30, 40 years, shot with many different cameras, have a lot more experience than I am. And they see the same things that I see. And so they can't dismiss it as a person that just walked into the shot. For instance, it can't be double exposure, because I was using an older camera that doesn't have an automatic double exposure, and I'm shooting digital. So the next thing is, and another reason why it's extremely unlikely for it ever to be a double exposure, is because the image itself, if you've ever seen double exposure images, I mean, and there's the two images that are bleeding into one another. They're different space. They occupy different spaces and times, and the head will be really big, and the background will be small, and this figure is actually in sync with the other picture, its environment. In other words, right. It's actually in sync. It's not something that's overlapped onto a photo, like it could have bled onto the photo through double exposure. So it's impossible to do that. I looked at other photos on the disc to see if by some very freak accident that some image from an earlier shoot somehow got on that image. And I never shot anyone in that position, leaning over, grabbing brochures in any shot. Mm-hmm. So there were just, any kind of skeptical argument I could remotely think of to possibly explain it. It doesn't work. It doesn't explain it at all. One of the weird things about the photo is that one of the arms isn't connected to the body. There is actually a tiny little space where you see completely through the arm, and you literally see the back wall and part of the spoke of the spindle of the staircase rail as people go up the stairs. They grab the rail and the little spokes that go up. Right. You can actually see a part of the spoke and the back wall, but no arm. And yet, these are things that a camera can't fake. Even a flawed camera can't reproduce that. That's something a human can't do, even in motion, in front of a camera. There are just so many strange things about it. The only reason that
I got to put you on the spot a little bit here. I mean, I would love to see that photo, and I'm sure my audience would too, if you're comfortable sharing it. Maybe if we challenge people to make their own assumptions, rather than you're coming out claiming that it's a ghost. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's going to be in volume 2, first of all.
Okay.
And I'm going to exactly lay it out as you talk about. I'm going to give out all the specifications of the camera, what the conditions were at the time of day. Mm-hmm. Let me answer your question first, and then I'll move on because I don't want to leave you hanging and forgot that you actually asked me a question.
Well, you could sneakily do that. But I'm making notes.
But no, it's going to be in volume 2. I do want to release it and want to control the release of it.
Sure.
And I don't mind showing it. I certainly have it on my cell phone, and I break it out and show it to people. And I think I even I know I showed some people that I think might provide an opinion to it. So I don't object to that. Let's talk about it, though.
Well, I would hurt myself if I didn't even ask.
No, so. You have to ask. You have to ask. Well, something I would have asked too. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? And if I had said no, assuming we switched positions, I'd be going, this guy's holding back on something.
Yeah.
I'm not going to believe it till I see it, because that is the way I am, okay, too. So no worries. I was thinking what would be great is if you have me back again, closer to the time volume 2, I would definitely let you see it.
Oh, I'd love to have you back. Absolutely. We should probably talk about volume 1 a little bit, though. Volume
1. Because there's more to that picture than even I'm talking about. The reason why I even released it to just to be real quick, the only reason why I even allowed it to be on my ghost story, it was twofold. I can't say that part of it wasn't a little bit selfishly motivated on my part, just to see what the reaction would be. But the main reason why I did it was that I had visited the Palomar Inn, and I was really concerned that it was about to fold. Mm-hmm. I talked to the owner, and he was owing a lot of money in back taxes. No one was renting the place, and he wasn't being able to really generate any kind of publicity for it. And I knew a connection that said, hey, my ghost story is looking for, ghost stories. And I hear you have a picture. You want to, you might want to contact them. And I was thinking, well, I would only contact them if it would help the hotel financially. Not that the show would. If airing of the show could drive people to the hotel to see for themselves and spend the night there and rent rooms, then I'd do it. But otherwise, I wasn't really, I was curious as to what the reaction would be, and I thought that my ghost story would actually be perfect. And you'll laugh at this, but the reason why I thought it would be perfect is because that show has a history of putting in so many bad paranormal pictures that aren't paranormal. You were talking like dust particles and, moisture particles, all these orbs. It's like Orb Central. That and I knew that they only got maybe 1 million, 2 million viewers, which to me is not. It's okay, but it's not great. It's okay. If it even gets that many, it might not get 2 million viewers until like it airs 20 times or something, and it's just net, or gross viewers. So I thought this is let's do a trial balloon. If it helps bring people to the hotel, that's great. But I don't think it's going to set the world on fire or go viral having my photo featured on my ghost story. And I went, I was very uptight with the show about how they were going to treat it. Because, they were wanting me to sign everything, just everything under the sun, give up all my rights to everything. And I didn't want to do that without having the, language moderated to where it's like, well, you can use the photo and you can own the photo as inserted into the episode, but I don't want to see this plastered all over the world. This is something I want to kind of control, because I'm still trying to determine if there is some kind of explanation out there for the photo that might explain it, rather than just go full guns and say it's a ghost. So I agreed under condition to allow it to be used. So and then I got real embarrassed after the filming. I was like going, oh well, I hope they don't air this. What did I do? I'm the fool. I'm going to let my ghost story tell my story, because that's what they were trying to. In some ways, they were saying, can you make it a little more scarier? Can you say it's a dark entity that haunts that place? And I'm like, no, I'll try to use some language to describe it, but I'll be honest with you, fear was not it. I wasn't scared when I saw the photo, and I don't think anything negative happened. And even more so, they were like saying, well, we're going to send you evidence that other people had sent. And we want you to take a look at it and want you to comment on it. And I looked at it and I wrote him back. I said, my advice to you is not to ask me what I think about this, okay? Because if you ask me, I'm going to tell you it's an orb and it's a dust particle and it's not paranormal. So just, please don't ask me, so I don't have to tell the truth on this. To their credit, as nervous as I was about what I was willing to say and what I wasn't willing to say, and about not showing me things that I don't think are paranormal and expecting me to admit that they are, they honored all of that. And they actually did a fairly honest, they did it's not fairly, they did an honest appraisal of what went on. I mean, there was more to the story that they cut out, but what they did show was accurate, and wasn't blown out of proportion. So I was very pleased with them. and they were honorable.
Well, that's reassuring.
So, yeah. And, but yeah, I was talking to Dale, the other guy that was on that episode, and they were trying to do the same thing with him too. They were saying, "Can you say darker?" And he's like going, "Well, I'm a historian, and this is, I can't really go that direction, Yeah. So I thought they did really well. But yeah, I'd be willing if you wanted to, have me out for part 2, with volume 2. I could even finish the story.
Yeah, absolutely.
And because I'd never had anything like that happen before or since. It's changed my views on the paranormal, and whether or not people believe it's a ghost or not, it convinced me that it really does exist. And it convinced me to have a more open mind and not be so cynical and set in my ways. And what I think is on the other side versus what is on the other side. And, and I'm always interested in what other people's perception of the photo or their explanation is. I know that, if someone's only explanation for it is that I'm a liar and a fraud, then I know that they don't have a clue as to how to explain it. And
I find
that's
it pretty
the best
common.
they can do.
There's hardcore skeptics out there that
Yeah.
You read all these message boards. I go on these things to kind of, it keeps me on my toes when I'm trying to, I'm skeptical myself, but I also believe in these things. But I'm all for ruling out the common causes. And there's people that when you have ruled out every possibility, still, stick to that idea that it just can't exist. And, to me, that's biased.
I hope you're enjoying my conversation with Craig Owens, author of Haunted by History Volume 1, which will be out very soon. Craig was kind enough to offer Deviatus listeners a discount for a limited time. For $10 off the retail price of the book, just head over to Bazaar Los Angeles website at bazaarla.com. And when you purchase the book, just click on the Apply Coupon box and type in Deviatus Pod to upload the coupon and obtain your discount. I'm actually pretty excited about this book, having grown up in Southern California myself and frequenting some of the locations he's already covered in Volume 1. I'll be back next time with my conclusion of my interview with Craig and more on the unexplained occurrences that happened during the creation of his book. Please don't forget to rate and review the show. Doing so will help other people with similar interests find the show, and it helps me know that I'm putting together something of value for you all. As usual, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at DeviatusPod, as well as on the new Facebook group page, linked to by my website at deviatus.com. Thanks so much for listening, and have a great week.